Now, next up in our video cast is I love to share a weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. And I give you 3 things to consider. And this week we're looking at the ancient Greek philosophers of Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. They are all of higher consciousness, of course. But who is of the highest consciousness? And this is super interesting. They're on the map of consciousness, they're a quantum leap between each other because, when you get up into those higher realms, 1 point is a quantum because it's a logarithmic scale. So 400 on the map of consciousness is 10 to the 400th power, whereas 500 is 10 to the 500th power. So that's, if you know your log, that's huge. You got to multiply 10, as you multiply one number by 10, by 10, by 10, it just gets huge. So that's our weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz, and I'm going to tell you the answer at the end of this. So that's it for this week's teachings of Dr. Hawkins' level of consciousness of willingness. Now, we're going to go back to the quiz to give you the answers to the quiz. So let me find my cheat sheet on the levels of consciousness of who do you think is of highest consciousness? And these were all ancient Greek philosophers. Is it Aristotle, Plato, or Socrates? So Aristotle calibrates at 498 in the map of consciousness. Genius level consciousness is typically 499, so that's still a quantum leap. 498 to 499 is still a quantum leap in power, but he's up near the genius level, and that's how I just assume that he is because of his, historical significance. So Aristotle calibrated at 498 on the map of consciousness. Plato calibrated at 485 on the map of consciousness, which is a quantum leap away from the genius level, but clearly he was genius. It was genius of his time. And the 400s is all the level of consciousness of the mind. This is all reason, rationality, science, understanding. Socrates is of the highest consciousness in this week's quiz. And Socrates calibrated at 540 on the map of consciousness, which is a quantum leap above the other 2. And in the realm of the level of consciousness of joy and unconditional love. Now, this is huge because he understood love and unconditional love at this level. And there's only 0.4% of today's population that ever reaches this level of consciousness. So it's huge, and all 3 of them are worthy reads and worthy to understand all of them. But Socrates understands love, and he's of the highest consciousness. If you want to learn more about Socrates and everything that he had to say. And as I was looking at this, there was a quote, I think it was Aristotle, who said something about love, like love didn't make any sense to him. I forget the quote. Let me see if I can find the quote, because it's kind of indicative of someone who is kind of enamored with the mind, for sure, and hasn't been exposed to the truth of the power inherent in the level of consciousness of love and unconditional love. So let me just look at this. What was that quote? I have it right here. Let me take a second while I launch the website. Here it comes. Let's see who said that and what they said, but it was kind of interesting that one of these guys said it. Okay, it wasn't Aristotle, and it definitely wasn't Socrates, so it had to have been Plato. Plato said, love is a serious mental disease. Okay. He was clearly not operating. Let's see, Plato was the lowest level of consciousness here. So he was not of low consciousness, but he's a quantum leap below the level of love at 485. So it's way out, it's like a light years away from his awareness, knowing that love is the truth, where true power really exist. And the fact that he thinks it's a mental disease is kind of funny. That would calibrate as not true, that love is a mental disease. Unless, of course, you're operating from lower levels of consciousness where you're clinging and holding on to what you think is love, what's really not love. You're grasping onto something that you think fulfills a need or whatever. When you're operating from true love, that doesn't happen anymore. I can assure you. I've been there on occasion. I'm working on it still. I still have my issues, but anyway, I know it's not a mental disease. It's funny. All right. So I promise you guys at the end of every broadcast, love is the truth. And even though it's not in your awareness, it's light years away from most people's awareness, which is why you don't know it's the truth. But it's an incredibly powerful level of consciousness to aspire to be loving, unconditionally loving and joyful. Don't should all over yourself about it though. You got to let go of the lower, and the rest, and the higher will reveal itself in its own good time. You don't want to force any of it, especially because that's kind of like you're punishing yourself for not being unconditionally loving. Don't do that, because experiences will show up in your life that are punishing. Take it from me. You don't want to invite punishment because you think you should be loving. Dr. Hawkins will say the same thing. Be willing to let go of the resistance to lovingness. Be willing to accept that love is the truth. That's a good starter kit. I'm willing to accept that love is the truth, and I understand that it's a high level of consciousness. I'm just not there yet. That could be your affirmation, right? Acceptance. You're accepting you're not there yet. That's okay. We're only human. All right. So I'm not sure what next week podcast will bring. I never do, even though I have it scheduled. Let me look. Let me see what I'm thinking I'm going to do next week. Let's see what we got going on. Willingness. Oh, we're going to talk about the processes of emotions at each level of consciousness. So that's a good one. We'll talk about emotions and what that all means at different levels of consciousness. All right. And then the week after that, I'm going to talk about how to let go of anger. Ooh, that could be good. Or I'm going to talk about pets. Having a pet is huge. I might talk about pets, lighten it up with something fun. Talk about the level of consciousness of animals and our household pets. If you don't have a pet, I'd recommend you have one, unless you're anger-ridden and rageful. Don't get a pet. You might want to hurt it. You don't want to do that. So if you're enjoying what's going on here, subscribe to my podcast at trumpeteroftruthradio.com. Or if you prefer the video version, you can go to YouTube or trumpeteroftruth.tv.com. And I'd love to get feedback and comments if this is helpful or useful. Should I keep doing it? That's up to you guys. Although, I'm eager to raise the level of consciousness of our planet to neutral. That's kind of my overarching intention. See, I'm setting intention here, folks. Neutral, our planet currently calibrates at 207 on the map of consciousness. Neutral would be 250, which is a quantum leap, and I can't do it alone, so I need some help with that. But I think neutral, just by the name alone, is the energy level of the planet could really clean up a lot of stuff. But we all got to contribute to that intention. Thanks for joining me. You can email me at liz@trumpeteroftruth.com. And we'll see you next week. Sayonara.